Picture. Big crowd we have here today. Well, as I was so kindly introduced, my name is Kad Strusiang, and I am a former journalist turned, I don't know, there's a bunch of stuff I do now. But I'm here to talk to you about not necessarily why ego is destructive, but why is it necessary to laugh at those in power and laugh at dictatorships. I'm going to start by rewinding to the year 1943, when Hitler was at the height of his powers. His empire, if I may call it that, stretched from the edges of Western Europe all the way to the edge of Moscow on the east. Hitler had absolute power. His Nazi party, his apparatus, took over every single part of life, whether it was culture, religion, political, social, military. There was no part of life in which the Nazi party didn't creep. And yet Hitler was afraid of a few things. Never mind that the Allied forces were building up their tanks and arms slowly. Never mind that in the East, his allies, Japan, was getting pushed back after 1942. Never mind that Italy wasn't doing so well in North Africa. Hitler wasn't afraid of any of those things. The thing that Hitler was most afraid during his time in power was being laughed at. Now remember, this is the year 1943. This is the height, the absolute zenith of Nazi Germany. But Hitler was afraid of two specific things, and I'm going to show them to you right now. This is Charlie Chaplin. Who's heard of Charlie Chaplin? Forget all the soldiers coming to fight him. He's afraid of this guy. This is from the movie The Great Dictator, a satire. Arguably the most powerful man in Europe, maybe even the world, was afraid of an actor in uniform playing with a ball. Why? I know it's going to run long, but it's worth it, I promise. The other thing that Hitler was afraid of is our next video. Cartoons.
To be a Nazi. To work 48 hours a day for the Führer.
Maybe people haven't heard of Charlie Chaplin. Who's heard of Donald Duck?
He Heil, but still we work like slaves, while the Führer brags and lies and rants and raves. He Heil, and work into our graves. Hey, Lila! Get to work!
So why is it that the most powerful man in the world is afraid of a cartoon duck and a man in funny tights and uniforms playing with a rubber ball? Why? Maybe because Hitler himself was not so far removed from a cartoon character and a man in tights playing with a rubber ball, only his ball was much larger and it was the world. What am I trying to point at today? The value of satire, the value of artistic license when dealing with matters of totalitarianism. What I want to deal with here is three things. And those are the three things that dictatorships are built on. And the three things where humor is able to undercut all of that and poke fun at them. I was a journalist for 10 years. My work has taken me across much of the world. I was in the Middle East during the height of the Arab Spring in Egypt. I was in Iraq after the fall of Saddam. I was in Afghanistan, Syria, and there is a common underlying theme in all of these places. Humor is banned. Now, why is that? Three reasons. Dictatorships are built on power, fear, and the ego. Let's start with the first, the ego. It takes a very egotistical man to think that he can run the whole country by himself. It's the type of ego that sees Stalin building giant statues of himself all over Russia. It's the type of ego that saw Ne Win in neighboring Myanmar change all the banknotes within the country so that it is divisible by the number 9 because a fortune teller told him so. It is the same type of ego that lets you create your own television show on a Friday night so that we can enjoy other festivities. It's that type of ego, ladies and gentlemen. It's that type of ego. So ego is the number one reason, that underlying notion that the dictator knows best, that no one else knows the solution to the country's problems, just the dictator, just the Stalins of the world, just the Hitlers of the world. Because God or power or righteousness or ideology has given them the strength, the knowledge, the wisdom to rule over everyone. Number one, ego. The second one is power. Now, I was in Iraq after the fall of Saddam. They used to tell me incredible stories about how much power Saddam wielded during his time. One particularly noted example is when he convened the first ever Ba'ath Party. That's the name of his party, by the way, the Ba'ath Party, which is a secular, totalitarian ideology that swept across much of the Middle East. The first Congress of the Ba'ath Party, Saddam came onto stage. He didn't do anything. Sat down at a big, long table, had a cigar, lit it, sat down, looked into the audience. Someone else came in. It was a deputy with a microphone. Started reading names. Just names. Saddam didn't say a word. Just started reading names of people in the audience. These people were forced to stand up, and they were taken outside by soldiers. And eventually, Saddam just kept looking, and people just kept staring at him, and names were being read, and they were being forced outside. So much so that everyone in the audience, petrified by the power that Saddam was showing, started jumping up spontaneously with no prompting and declaring their allegiance to the party, going, "I love Saddam. Saddam is great. Saddam is amazing." And then, as they're doing that, these names kept being called out, and they kept being taken outside. That is the type of power that dictators wield. That is the type of power that dictators have a hold over their populace. And the last, and perhaps the most underlying fundamental reason why dictatorships succeed in the world is fear. Absolute rulers rule with absolute fear. We've seen Nazi films where Joseph Goebbels or the SS or Himmler's forces would undercut every single rung of society, have spies everywhere, so that you are too afraid to stand up and believe in what's right. And you're too afraid to criticize the party, to criticize the ruler, to even express a modicum of opinion that differs from the norm. Why is that relevant today? Because humor undercuts all of it. Humor undercuts everything, and we see humor banned in these totalitarian regimes. Because they take away the fear. You're not going to be afraid of something that you can laugh at. B, a man that is caricatured by a duck or a man, an actor in tights playing with a ball doesn't seem all that powerful. And B, it hurts their ego when you're made fun of I'm sure everyone here has been made fun of a few times, so we know how fragile our egos can be in those circumstances. So I think the most important thing that you can do in a dictatorship is to laugh at the dictator. I was in Egypt towards the tail end of the Arab Spring, and there were so many things that could have gone wrong for the protesters. The security forces had tanks in the streets. The security forces had spies in every cafe listening to every conversation. And the security forces knew what to do if the protesters started throwing streets or shooting guns or coming with them with violence, because they know how to deal with violence. They do not know how to deal with humor. So the Egyptian protesters, awesome as they are, started coming up with these caricatures of Mubarak, who's in power, of the security forces. They had some awesome signs, like a really big loading sign on one of the posters that says, "Democracy loading," and then "error" at the bottom, which I thought was hilarious. And it was these kinds of humor apparatus that took away the power of the people that were in power. And that's important, because we live in a world where totalitarianism is creeping across every sector of society. We look to the major institutions that usually engender the values that we hold dear. For hundreds of years, well, not hundreds, but for the better part of 100 years, the United States was looked upon as a country that sort of espoused Western liberal values. And look where they are now. We have Donald Trump tearing down the foundations of Western liberal democracy. How do we get to him? Do we fight him with his angry, hateful rhetoric? No, we fight him with humor. We make fun of him. We draw big babies with bad hair, and that is Donald Trump. That is how we fight totalitarianism. We fight back with our humor. We don't sink to their level. We rise up. I have the pleasure of teaching at this university and the honor of addressing the students and audience here today. You guys are the future generation. And you guys need to realize that through your own actions, through what you seek to oppose, and becoming smart about them, you can take down empires, you can take down governments that are totalitarianism. I've seen it happen. I was in Egypt, I was in Tunisia, I was in Libya, and I know how much humor can impact those that are afraid of us. Because those that are afraid of us will always be afraid of being laughed at, of having their egos torn down, of having their powers taken away, being afraid of not being taken seriously because they're very serious, generally, usually men. So I want to continue today, but I think if I do anything else, I might be censored. So I just wanted you to understand that you should always oppose those that seek absolute power and use humor to do so, because it's generally the most effective weapon. Thank you.